Good evening and welcome. My name is Antonia Lewis. I'm the president of the Shiloh Chicago Academy Alumni Association, or the SC3A for short. And I hope that you have had as good a time as I've had this weekend, celebrating 109 years of Christian education. This is the last event of the weekend, and if it hasn't already encouraged you to get out into those streets and let your voice be heard in the name of all that you believe in, including Christian education, I don't know what will. But we have before you a presentation by Dr. Calvin Rock and a panel to follow, moderated by Edward Woods III of Alumni, um, including Carl Boyd, Judge of the Circuit Court of Cook County, Kamala Boyd, Director of Marketing and Communications, Georgia Academy of Family Physicians, Leah Chapman, licensed clinical therapist and master social worker and CEO of Intervene LLC, Thurman DeMills, private attorney, Ernest Flowers, founder and principal of FF3 Consulting, LLC, and Dr. Nos Thomas, principal at Dr. Nos Consulting and Coaching. Also, we'll have David Person, journalist, broadcaster, and owner of David Person Media. If you weren't aware, Mr. Person, Miss Boyd, Mr. DeMills, and Mr. Boyd are all alum of our fine institution. So let's make sure that we big up the people who have used Shiloh as a launching pad and are now doing great things in the world. Um, Before I get into pivot rather to Marilyn Fouché, who is the class of 1962 and 65, to do the introduction of our first presenter, I just want to make a last appeal to everyone with regard to supporting our school. The funds of the Alumni Association are used in various ways, from maintaining our community garden to purchasing laptops this year. We've purchased um, sports equipment in the past. We got a new air conditioners. We've supported uh, faculty gifts and recognition, and just all different sorts of ways. The president of the Alumni Association also serves on the school board of the school, and so we are very intimately tied to the decision making of the school. So I just want to make one final appeal. Our association coordinates this alumni weekend every year. That's actually one of our primary responsibilities. And the purpose of Alumni Weekend is to bring to light the areas in which we, as alumni, family, and friends, can support our school in its pursuit of excellence. And so, if you haven't been by the grounds in a while, or you haven't talked to anyone that's over at the school lately, I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to show your face and, again, let your voice be heard about how our school is supported. You heard that Pastor John Boston, Shiloh's new pastor, has been working very rigorously to increase visibility of our school, from getting our doors painted red, the new school colors of Chicago SDA Christian School, to garnering a lot of donor support from Lake Region Conference to the Child Impact International. Just over the last several just in the last few weeks, we've received tons of support, but we continue to need yours. That's just seed money. We need to continue to support our school because those gifts, though they seem large now, are not sustainable into the future. And Pastor Boston has advocated for the approval, if you have not heard, for need-based scholarships for up to the capacity of the school at this point. So if you have a child that you are looking to move, transition from the public school system, or you feel, as we do, that Christian education is more important now than it ever has been before, we urge you to make sure you take a look at our school. Bring it back. It's still a great school, and we continue to need your support and your students. So at this time, I'll hand it over to Marilyn Fouché to introduce our speaker. I look forward to seeing you all at the end of the program and for many years to come in support of our school. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Marilyn Fouché, and I'm the class of 1962 and 1965. This afternoon, our speaker will be Dr. Calvin B. Rock. Dr. Calvin B. Rock, who retired as the Vice President of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, is a native of New York City, New York. His childhood and youth were spent in New York, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and from age 11 on, in Los Angeles, California. Our speaker is a product of Christian education through his years at Oakwood College. Graduate school includes the University of Detroit with the MA in Sociology and Vanderbilt University, where he earned a Doctor of Ministry and a Doctor of Philosophy degree, both in religious ethics. Pastor Rock is the father of 3 daughters, 4 grandsons, 1 granddaughter, and 4 great-grandchildren, 1 boy and 3 girls. He and his present wife, Sharon, currently reside in his retirement home of Las Vegas, Nevada. His 63 years of active ministry include pastorates in the states of South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Michigan, New York, and 3 years as Associate Secretary of the Ministerial Association of the Southern Union Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, headquartered in Decatur, Georgia. And after retirement, a total of 11 years of service in Las Vegas, Nevada, and Phoenix, Arizona. In April of 1971, he became the 8th president of then Oakwood College in Huntsville, Alabama, and functioned there until July of 1985, when he became the vice president of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. He resigned from that post in January 2002. He chaired the boards of Loma Linda University and Hospital for 11 years, and what was then Oakwood for 6 years. Meanwhile, he has since 1994 chaired the board of Operation Reachback Inc., the Association of Black Seventh-day Adventist Professionals, a division-wide organization dedicated to recognition of the social aspects of the gospel. Dr. Rock loves to write and is the author of 8 books and the editor of another, all but 2 published by the Seventh-day Adventist publishing houses in North America. From 1988 to 2001, he contributed a regular column, Faith Alive, for the Adventist Review. His latest publication, Protest in Progress, available online, is accepted as the most important statement on Black SDA history available. He also loves the work of evangelism and has conducted soul-winning campaigns in numerous cities in the United States, as well as in London, England, Accra, Ghana, Nairobi, Kenya, Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, Novosibirsk, Russia, and Bucharest, Romania. Our speaker is a 3rd-generation Seventh-day Adventist. His maternal grandmother was in the original class at Oakwood in 1896 and later served as chamber nurse for Ellen G. White. He firmly believes in the efficacy of the Word of God, with special emphasis on the righteousness of Christ. Our next speaker will be Dr. Calvin B. Rock.
That generous introduction, and thanks to President Lewis and the team of the alumni of Shiloh Academy for the privilege of being able to share in this anniversary weekend. I am very, very, very much appreciative of the invitation because Chicago means a lot to me for reasons I won't go into. And of course, Christian education is very, very close to my heart. What I'm going to do as I fulfill this assignment, and I was told to take about 30 minutes, I'm going to try to do that. So without any further introduction, I want to get right into the topic that I was assigned. I have reworded it a little bit to say, as you can see, Black Seventh-day Adventist Civil Activism. Now, I want to discriminate between civic and civil activism. When we talk about civic activism, we're really dealing with neighborhood events, volunteering to serve at the hospital, or getting people out to vote in an election, or cleaning up the streets, or getting better drinking water, as is the case in some cities we know about right now. Things that have to do with local politics and local social action. But what I've been asked to do is to talk about Seventh-day Adventist connection or efforts having to do with federal regulation, federal law. And when we talk about this, we're talking about civil activism or activism in the civil specter. So we're going to do that, and we're going to get right into it. And the first slide that announces this leads us into the discussion of what I've called a time period display that organizes in contrast where the U.S. government has been and where the SDA Church has been since the very beginnings of our existence as a people, and even before that. And I present this to you because it's really impossible to understand why we think like we do as Seventh-day Adventists, why we have such a conservative social theology, why it is that we are hesitant as a people and have always been to get involved in politics. Now, as you shall see in a moment, and I'm going to call some names, there are exceptions. But as a rule, the church, white and black, has been in North America very guarded about civil activism or activism in the civil sphere of social need. And this timetable overview will tell you why. First of all, notice in our elementary or our first cubicle that slavery defines from 1831 till 1867 where the government was. And on the extreme right, you see that the Millerites and the pre-Seventh-day Adventist pioneers were stoutly anti-slavery and abolitionists. They didn't have a problem. But all this was before the church got started. We got our name in 1860, and we got some organization in 1863, but we became accepted and legalized in 1865. And before that time, before we became a legal entity as a Seventh-day Adventist church, we were being prepared gospel-wise, doctrinally, from the Millerites, who believed in the second coming of Christ, and Sabbatarians, who finally got together and they bonded and became the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the middle 1860s. And all during that time, from 1831, when Miller first said God told him to go to work, and he, of course, was the product of Methodism, and he had his visions, this group of people was very strongly abolitionist. They wrote, they preached about slavery, and they fought for its overflow or its overthrow. Then in 1865, and from then until 1896, what we saw, what I like to call the Southern Recovery. This is a period of time, 30 or more years, when the South, embittered and hostile because they lost the Civil War, fought hard to get back on its feet. By this time, our church was organized, and we had early and later pioneers, I like to call them, leading up to the dawn of the 20th century in 1900, and they were very much a segregationist group. Now, you have to understand, we didn't have many blacks anyway. Black adherents didn't really begin to show up in numbers until the late 70s and 1880s, and then into the 90s, the beat really began to increase. But as it did, our Southern white brother and sisters refused, and remember, they were under the edict of separate but equal, or they were about to be thrust into that edict, but they were already segregationists in their views. And when segregation became legal in 1896, and the country structured separate but equal legislation saying blacks and whites could not worship together, eat together, sleep together, that there just had to be complete separation, the church functioned under that edict. And they did so under the name of gospel expediency. They said, look, if we let whites see black folk coming in, they're not going to join our churches. And they were right. These were the high days for hanging and shooting black people on the least of accusations. And some years during the 1890s and the early decades of the 20th century, hundreds of black were being shot and hanged, and it was impossible under separate but equal. They felt, and I think we have to give them a pass to some degree, that it was possible for blacks and whites to worship together. And in doing so, they also structured a pattern or policy that said, you cannot do anything about it as a church. It's bad out there. We can't do anything about it. The government says we can't hang together. We can't worship together. We can't work together. And it's against the gospel of Jesus Christ for us to fight against the government. Romans 13 says we must obey the government. Now, that was an excuse for some. They didn't want us there anyway. But whatever the motivations, the fact is that this is the period when our church structured the policy and practice of mission minus social activism. We're going to wait till the Lord comes and he's going to solve it all. Then from 1954 till 1968, we were a people still as a Seventh-day Adventist church. The nation rescinded and annulled separate but equal in 1954. But the Adventist church was slow to get involved. Other churches did. And it should be said that from 1954 to 1960, almost every major denomination in the country kicked in and said, yes, we will no longer segregate in our worship. And the Catholics and Methodists and Baptists and all the big churches were involved in desegregating, but the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It was not until 1965 that we, 11 years later, finally said we must desegregate as the law now allows. And that began, it was the end of the excuse, or let's say even the valid reason for gospel expediency, but it was still a carryover with regard to mission without social activism. So that even though the civil rights movement ended in 1968, and in 1968, Johnson gave to the country the civil rights law that said we should have no further discrimination anywhere, not only in education, as had been proclaimed in 54 in Brown versus Kansas, but now in any way, not only in education, but in all aspects of life, America should be thoroughly desegregated. The church was very slow to get involved, and when they did, as they gradually did from the 60s to 2000, it was still with mission minus social activism. And from 2000 to 2020, which is as far as I'd like to propose we think about in this project, there was complete discrimination achieved in our church. Today, we are not a segregated people. Today, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is completely desegregated. There are no more ways that our schools have quotas. There are no white churches that tell you to go down the street to the black church like they did during these other periods. Separate people is gone, and gospel expediency is gone, but mission minus social activism is still with us, even though we're thoroughly desegregated, and the church is wide open. The church is wide open with respect to all of its institutions. With that background, then, let's consider some of the individuals and some of the organizations who have been active during these periods. The first group that I'm going to talk about is those who have been active in the outer community. These next several individuals whose names we will view and whose experiences we will truncate in a brief description are individuals who are out there in the community. Later on, we're going to talk about some who worked on the church. But the first one of this group, the first group, is Dr. Howard, Dr. T.R. Howard of Mississippi, thoroughly Adventist, Oakwood, Union College, Loma Linda, which is where he got his medical degree. And he set up practice in Mount Bayou, Mississippi, and established the Regional Council of Negro Leadership. And that was big. Way back there in the early 50s, he was able to set up, and even in the late 40s, when he really began, the RCNL. He established the Regional Council of Negro Leadership, and their mantra was, don't buy gas where you can't use the restroom. Well, that was pretty bold back there, but he got away with it. He had this big, beautiful facility that he built to take care of the physical needs of the people in the Delta there in Mississippi, but he assisted in the prosecution of the murderers of Emmett Till in 1955, and when he did that, the very liberal whites even could take it no longer, and he had to flee. And guess where he went? He went to Chicago, which is where he continued to be a spokesman for justice. Then there was Irene Morgan, another early trailblazer in this regard. Irene Morgan, in July of 1944, bought a ticket from Gloucester, Virginia to Baltimore, Maryland. When she got on a bus, she was told to get off or to get back, and she refused to go to the back of the bus. And she was told to get off, and she wouldn't get off. And the deputy laid hands on her, and she tore his jacket off and kicked him in the groin. This good Adventist sister, this layman here in Virginia, and they dragged her off the bus, arrested her, took her to court. And when she had paid her fine and spent a day or two there, she sued the state of Virginia, and that case was pursued with William Hastie and Thurgood Marshall, two of the greatest activist lawyers we've seen, black, in the history of our land. And they won the case before the Supreme Court. And on June the 4th, 1946, the Supreme Court issued a ban on segregation on interstate travel, all precipitated by a good black Seventh-day Adventist female. All right. Next, I want you to know about Alfonso Green. You see some of his stats there, but he earned his spurs in his social activism with the NAACP, where he was vice president of the state of North Carolina, and later he organized the chapter himself. a branch in Clinton, North Carolina, and he served as executive director of NAACP later on for the state of Kentucky, a real aggressive soldier for justice as he represents the church. He didn't always say, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, but people knew, and we can be proud of what he did. But now listen, the other thing I want to say about him is that in the middle 60s, it was Alfonso Green who led the students in their integration of the Central Church there in Huntsville, right near the university. They had been told never to come back when they tried to get in a little earlier, but he called in Channel 31 and had cameras out there on a Sabbath in March of 65, and they finally let them in, and the rest is history. But here you have some people who in his case, he did try to integrate within the system. But what must be seen is he was using society to break down the barriers. Now, there's some other names you want to see, and one of them is Charles Joseph, who was president of the Lake Region Conference, as you know, for a number of years in the 70s, and who, before he became the president and was a part of Lake Region, served in Mississippi, and there he was a part of a number of organizations who were fighting segregation in the throes of the battle. He was familiar with the leadership and was a member of NAACP and of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. And he was in all those big marches, Pastor Joseph, in Selma, in DC, in Selma, the Poor People's March in 68. He was a champion for social justice when a lot of Black Seventh-day Adventists wouldn't step out and do it. I recall, for instance, I was pastoring in Detroit during this time, much of it, and I did some marching down on Woodward Avenue when our people were fighting for better wages from Ford manufacturing, car manufacturing people. And my secretary called me one day and said, Pastor, would you like a big laugh? I said, yes, I'll take a laugh. She said, somebody said they saw you marching with those people downtown. I said, would you like a laugh? She said, yes. I said, it was I. Yes, I was marching. And I'd always try to be a part of the ministerial associations in whatever city I happened to be pastoring. But here in Detroit, I was with the people marching around the Ford offices. And she said, well, we can't do that. We can't fight. I said, I'm not fighting. I'm marching and singing, but we're not supposed to do that. Well, that was the way it was with our people back there. And strangely enough, it's still the way it is with some of our people because they have been taught through the years mission without activism. They've been taught that the three angels' message in the gospel of Jesus Christ that we preach and believe does not include social activism. If you want to do it on your own, maybe, and certainly the church should not do it at all. The church should never be involved. And this has been a problem. It still is a problem. But thank God for people like Pastor Joseph who had the courage to step out and lead as he did. And he brought that same spirit into Lake Region, as some of you will remember. And then there was Earl Moore, his big buddy and big friend. And Earl was a classmate of mine. Earl had been a veteran and came to Oakwood, and he left, went out into the field, and immediately demonstrated his fervor for social justice by participating in the struggle in the Georgia area and wherever else he served. He was a part of the Poor People's Campaign. He participated in Resurrection City, and he drove the van after the riots in the middle 70s. And again, I was in Detroit when that horrific riot was held, broke out, and 43 people were killed in 76, 77. But it was Earl Moore who came all the way from Nashville He was serving in the conference office there in Central States or South Central with this van that had nursing facilities and food and other means of restoration and healing for a wounded community. And he is to be remembered fondly for that. Then let me tell you about Matthew Strong. Matthew Strong was a minister who in 1908, when he was a young pastor, fought for better conditions within the church. But then when he retired in the late 40s, he became a champion for justice in the society itself, outside of the church. And he was the president of Florida's largest NAACP unit, which was the one there in Tampa. And that was unheard of. People were aghast. A Black retired Adventist preacher, the president of the NAACP. But as we'll see in a moment, he wasn't the only one. Well, there are a couple of others in this vein that you must see. And we go back to the last one. There are two other people who were there. One was, was, because he's no longer with us, Warren Banfield. Banfield became the president of this same NAACP in the 50s and, in the 70s, in the middle 70s, and here we get our dates. We had them before us. From 51 to 57, he again was a marvel to Black Adventism and white Adventism. How could a Black preacher be the president of NAACP? But he stepped out and he represented us well. And of course, he later became the president of the South Atlantic Conference. And then the final example, and you'll understand this is not everybody. It's impossible to get them all, but I'm giving you a few and maybe most really of those that I know about who stepped out in this regard, not the least of whom, and perhaps more and better known than any, is Sheila Jackson Lee, graduate of Yale University, and also getting her jurisprudence from other institutions of note, and finally being elected as a member of the House of Representatives as a female congresswoman from the 18th district of the great city of Houston. And there she has championed almost every kind of right you can think of. God bless her. Obamacare, child care, police brutality, the HBCUs, women's rights, you name it. Our sister Sheila has been there, and we owe her, and the nation owes her for what she has done. Let's look next at the other division. This is a division of Black Seventh-day Adventist activists who have demonstrated their ardor for justice and equality and equity within the church. And there are a few of these whose names I'd like to call. One is Orrin Troy Sr. Orrin Troy is the first that we know of Adventist THD, not just PhD, but Doctor of Theology, not Doctor of Philosophy. He was certainly one of the very first Blacks in the land and the very first in our denomination. Dr. Troy had a unique way of helping to break down injustice in the church. He did it while he was pastoring Shiloh, by the way. And he pastored Shiloh for a number of years in the 50s. And while he was studying at the University of Chicago, getting his master's degree, he became a friend of Claude Barnett. Barnett was the founder of the Associated Negro Press, ANP. Had installations all over the country and overseas. He's called the Black Father the father of Black journalism, African American journalism. Anyway, Barnett took a particular interest in studying racial conditions in denominations, Catholic, Baptist, whoever, Methodist, Church of God in Christ, whoever. And he was particularly tuned into Adventism. He wasn't an Adventist, but he and Troy became friends. And Troy very quietly would tip him off as to what was going on wrong racially in the church, particularly at EMC, now Andrews, EMC in those days when they had to eat at separate tables and they couldn't date across racial lines and they, all the rest of it. They had boundaries for our Black students. We'll leave it there. And Troy would tell this to Barnett. Barnett would put it in his papers. And I wish I had more time to expand on it, but Troy had a hand-in-glove affiliation and association with Barnett, and in that way, the word got out. And our church has never been great on allowing bad publicity. So it was the very threat of exposure, that gave impetus to the leadership of the church to do better at EMC and other places because of the work that Owen Troy was able to do. Then there was Frank Hale. Many of you knew him. Frank Hale, as nobody else, was determined to tear down injustice in the Adventist church. And he did so by organizing the Layman's Leadership Conference in the early 60s before he became president of Oakwood in 66. And we were all surprised that the church would make a zealot, a real radical like Frank Hale, the president of one of our schools, but they did. And he never ceased in his efforts to promote integration and fellowship in a loving way, but a firm and a very radical, on some occasions, manner. There's a lot to be said about the Layman's Leadership Conference. One of the things that should be said is that they attacked segregated arrangements in higher education, in our academies, in our churches. And if you ever want to read, please do so and be inspired about what Frank did in his books, and he's written several that bear his name. Then there was the Washington, D.C. committee that was formed in the wake of the Lucy Byard affair that we all know about, when late 1943 she was refused at our hospital and sanitarium in Washington, D.C., and had to go to Freedman's and died there several weeks or a few months later over at Freedman's. Not on the steps of the GC sanitarium as we once were told. But anyway, when she was refused, a group of people led by Eva B. Dykes and the Dotsons of the DuPont Park Church got together and they formed a committee, and they established or wrote a document called "Will the Seventh-day Adventist Church Honor the Four Freedoms?" And when they talked about the four freedoms, they were talking about the freedom to assemble, the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, and so forth, that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had voiced back in 1939. And those were popular to talk about at that time. And they were challenging the church, and they challenged the GC leadership. And this was months before we got Black conferences and the work of that committee of laypersons. It is felt that this was the first lay protest. Frank Hale's thing came later. This was the first Black Adventist lay protest, and it had a very positive influence in the General Conference, and they were right there in the area to talk to the president and others in the establishment of regional conferences. So there are a couple more, and then we're going to give you another word as we conclude. The other two that I want you to be aware of are Arna Bontemps. Arna Bontemps was born in Louisiana to a very fervent, some would say strict, Seventh-day Adventist family. His father was an elder there. They moved to California when he was a baby. He went to Adventist high schools there and finally went to Pacific Union, where he graduated and was then soon after called to teach in Harlem at Harlem Academy. And after that, he taught in some other places, including Oakwood College, where he went in 1931. And in between, by the way, he taught at Shiloh. He was there as well for a while. But at Oakwood is where he really became estranged from the church. And that's sad to say, because he fought, well, let's put it this way. He wasn't aggressive in terms of going into the public with his superior journalistic skills. And in New York, while he was teaching at Harlem Academy, he was a part of the Harlem Renaissance, you recall, that group of erudite authors and scholars. And he carried that tradition with him to Oakwood and these other places where he went. But the denomination did not like it because he was doing novels like Sad Faced Boy and other novels that he did, which were depicting, many of them, the sad fate of blacks back there. But they were novels. They weren't true. They were novels, and you weren't supposed to write or read novels. So when he went to Oakwood and they had that strike in 1931, and the students would not go to school, and they were demanding that they have no more white principals. They wanted a black president, and this is what produced Elder Moran in 32. But in 31, when the riot broke out, the denomination, the faculty, which was white at Oakwood, blamed Bontemps. And Bontemps left around 33, right after he had been semi-involved in the Scottsboro boys case. Now, if you don't know about that, in 1931, two white girls in Scottsboro, the area of Scottsboro, Alabama, blamed 9 black young men for raping them. Later, one of them confessed that they were lying, but they were immediately tried, and they were given the sentence of execution. And the Alabama mobs surrounded the jails where they were being held, and they would never have lived had not over 100 soldiers guarded them for some time. And they went through a process where for years they were living under condemnation for execution, which was the penalty for raping or touching a white woman, except that the Communist Party and a few other liberal groups came in and began to work for them, and none of them died as being executed, but many of them grew old in prison. And it was 1946 and 47 before the last one left there broken in spirit and body, hanging under the threat of death all those years. And Bontemps was a part of the outbreak of that, because Langston Hughes, his good buddy from New York and the Harlem Renaissance, had visited Oakwood in 31, 32, and he wanted to go talk to these people and attempted to talk to the girls who'd been raped. And again, Bontemps was blamed. It was later on when his good friend Nipson, who was one of the editors of the Ebony magazine, wrote him. And by this time, Bontemps had become very estranged. He was being estranged from the church. But he wrote to honor Bontemps, and he said, "Can you tell me about the social attitudes of the Seventh-day Adventist Church?" And Bontemps wrote him and said, "The Adventist Church is a wonderful group. They do a lot of mission work. They give out clothes. They go overseas. They are all over the world helping people. But when it comes to race relations, they are retarded." And the editor of Ebony, I don't know what he did with that. The records don't show, but he was informed, Herb Nipson, from Dr. Bontemps, of something that was true then, and sad to say, has been fairly much the case even until this day in our blessed and beloved and God ordained prophetic miracle, which is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Finally, my conclusion to you is, and I hope we'll have a chance for some questions. My conclusion is as follows. Black Seventh-day Adventists can be proud of those who have risked to speak out against injustice and for equity without and within the church. That there have not been many more is due largely to the belief among Black clergy and laity that socio-political activity is not legitimate as a gospel endeavor. The needs are A, more minority writers who can interpret original scripture through the lens of the oppressed. And that's one of the problems. All this time, when we've had mission minus activism, and we've had people like you've heard about here to fight in different ways, the church's belief and teaching is keep this out of the gospel program. This is not a part of the gospel work. And it is still that attitude today. And that is because we haven't had enough minority men and women to read the Greek and the Hebrew and to tell us through the lens of our socioeconomic experience what God is telling us. We've had to depend on others to tell us what the Greek says and what the Hebrew says. We have a few more now, praise God, but we need more to write about it and let us know what God meant at the Exodus and what Jesus meant when he was before his people in Matthew 23 and 25 and other places, talking about dealing with the marginalized and oppressed. And then we also need a people who will be stimulated to act in the tradition of Jesus himself, who while on earth, no other way to put it, was a fearless and sacrificial social activist. I wish I had time to run that down, but you just think about it. Jesus was a social activist in the way he mingled with the Samaritans and the outcasts, the poor, the blind, the needy, the sick, and the way he said himself in Luke chapter 4, verses 16 to 19, that he had come to loose the prisoners, to lift the heavy loads, and to set free those who walk in darkness. And that is not only spiritual, but social and physical darkness as well. So goes the presentation, and I yield back now to the moderators.
Good God, what are we doing here? Welcome to Shiloh Alumni. I repeat, welcome to Shiloh Alumni. We are excited to be here for this alumni broadcast with regards to this virtual space and seeing what God has done for 109 years. I repeat, 109 years for Seventh-day Adventist Christian education in Chicago on the South Side. We are excited to talk about the Black Christian's civic duty today. The Black Christian civic duty today. I'm your host, Edward Woods III, and I am the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director for the Lake Region Conference, as well as the chairperson of the Conscience and Justice Council. And I want to give a shout out to the Shiloh Chicago Academy alumni president, Antonia Lewis. She has done a fine job in organizing and putting things together, as well as to who we love so much and so dearly, Marilyn Fouché, who can bring any and all of us together. This evening, I am joined with some distinct panelists that I have the privilege of knowing and have fellowshiped with. And we're just excited to have them here with us. Of course, we will do ladies first because I am a gentleman. And we want to welcome all the way from Georgia by way of Chicago, the director of communications in Georgia for an association. Can we give it up for Kamala Boyd? Kamala, welcome to the broadcast. Look at you, 78 to 86. Look at you, Masters of Science. We're so proud of you, Cam. Look at you doing big things. If y'all don't know, you better watch her Facebook. She'll get you told, but she's never afraid to speak truth to power. And I know it's going to be exciting, and all hands will be on deck because Kamala's going to speak some truth. So, Kamala, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thank you, Woody. Good to see you. We know you when we call you Woody.
Yes, Lord, have mercy. It's good to see you as well. All right, the social worker that everybody talks about from Ypsilanti, Michigan. She is no stranger to being an advocate for the least of these, as well as to those who may have no one to speak up for. Let's welcome Leah Chapman, all the way from Ypsi. Leah Mills Chapman. Oh, look at her. Doesn't she look distinguished? Got her game face on. Don't let the semi-smile fool you. She's still a teddy bear. But Leah, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you so much, Woody, for having me on this panel.
All right. Now that we have the ladies, let's get to the gentleman, a Chicago favorite who's a member of the Rosa Parks Committee, who Dr. Rock says we got to write things down and document. A legend in his own right. Let's welcome from this virtual space, all the way from Huntsville, Alabama. Can we give it up for David Person?
That's quite an introduction, man. I feel like I need to mail you a check.
You know what? The checks are going to Shiloh today, David, but my personal check, I'll send you the Cash App and the text, and we can go from there. But otherwise, all the checks today are going to the school. Beautiful. All right. An attorney. We need an attorney, someone that dots the I's and crosses the T's, and a legend and a veteran in Chicago, a member of the Shiloh Seventh-day Adventist Church. We are welcome to have the distinguishable counselor, Thurman DeMills.
Hello.
Hello, sir. How are you? It's good to see
good.
You.
Good to be among such a distinguished panel.
All right. If we have an attorney, we need to have a judge because court is in session. And if we want to have the right type of judge to handle this type of panel, because we know sanctions will be issued, let's welcome the Honorable Carl Boyd, Judge of Cook County.
I'm experiencing some audio difficulties here, but I'd like to first of all say to God be the glory. I'm glad to be in the service today. I'm a proud graduate of Shiloh Elementary School in 1979, and it is a privilege to join this distinguished and esteemed panel today. Thank you, Woody.
Well, Judge, we hear you quite clearly. So as long as you don't need to use the gavel, your voice is strong, and we will take heed. All right. Every now and then at the great Oakwood University, you find a partner that you can roll the dice with, whether it's spades or whether it's life. I'm a financial investor, a guru, someone who's ahead of his time, but always wants to find a way to give back and invest in Christian education. Can we welcome all the way from New York, Ernest Flowers?
Thank you, my partner, Woody. Good to see you.
How you doing?
Shiloh for having me. It's an honor.
It's good to see you. I like not being a stranger to so many different folk. And last but not least, we got to have a doctor in the house, a pastor in the house. And we have Dr. Corey Thomas is here, who has his own broadcast on Sunday. Just a shameless plug, but we want to tell everybody to tune in tomorrow at 7 o'clock, where we have the NOS Coaching LLC will be in the house tomorrow night at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern. A fantastic preacher, someone you can talk to, and someone who's not afraid to use his voice. And I find that a rarity amongst pastors, but to have one in the midst that actually does it is not only a blessing for you and I, but a blessing to the body of Christ. Dr. Thomas, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you, Brother Woody. It's good to see you. Good to see the esteemed panel and looking forward to an exciting conversation.
All right, you know what? We just heard from the GOAT in Dr. Rock and some of the things that he shared about us not having to be ashamed about our place in history. And we've had voices in the past, we have voices currently, and it's just something that we can be excited about and affirming as Black Seventh-day Adventists. What were some of your takeaways as we bridge the gap from his stellar presentation to our panel? What were some of the takeaways that you gleaned? Just to say top 2 to 3 takeaways, not a dissertation, top 2 to 3 takeaways that you gleaned from Dr. Rock's presentation. All right, Kamala, I don't see you often, so you can't hit me. So I'm going to start with you. Kamala Boyd, please.
Well, a couple of things that I heard very quickly was the fact that Adventism has always been involved, Black Adventists in particular, in the civil rights movement and in change. So the question that this panel has come together for is actually answered. Where is the place? Well, we see the place, at least in Black Adventism. So that's the first thing that I saw was the answer to the question, and probably a good way to start the panel. We've been there. We have a duty, and we've had notable members of our denomination that have been active and well before many of us even knew, or many of us were even born.
Thank you so much. David Person.
Yeah, I concur with my friend Cam. I think the question has been answered to some degree, at least from a historical standpoint. Now, I appreciate Dr. Rock's presentation, but I would quickly add that I think there are a lot of people who could also be named, people who are much more, I'll say, from a time standpoint, are a lot closer to the time that we're living in today, and even who are active today. I thought about Dr. Jesse Wilson and some of his civil activism out in California, Dr. Carlton Bird and Pastor Devlier Snell, who have been very active in Huntsville, and then laypersons like Mrs. Edna Daly, who was an icon at Oakwood, I think from the early 70s to the end of the 90s probably, who was active in civil rights prior to her employment at Oakwood. And there's a young man named Brendan Lewis, who was an Oakwood student just a few years ago, who during the pandemic literally organized the George Floyd protest that took place in downtown Huntsville that hundreds of people participated in. And you've got people like Kenneth Anderson, who is the director of multicultural affairs for the city of Huntsville, Oakwood alum, Stephanie Strong, who has been very active, not just in Huntsville, but across the state in civil action. And there are others of us who have been involved. So we can update that history just a little bit.
Thank you so much, David, for that. And don't forget yourself and the things that you have done in Huntsville, Alabama, with regards to the Confederate statue coming down at the Madison County Courthouse and lending your voice to the Rosa Parks Committee. And I think what you're saying is, not only do we have history, but we have people who are standing on history so that the torch is not blown out, but it stays lit for others, not just for today, but also future generations. So thank you so much for sharing that. Judge Carl Boyd, what do you say?
I thought that Dr. Rock's presentation was phenomenal. More importantly, to add to that, what the prior presenters articulated is the notion of courage. We have to act with courage and a sense of urgency. Too often we become complacent, and that complacency leads to several disadvantages to us, our families, and our communities. So I think we need to act with a sense of urgency and be courageous in our efforts, intentional as well as deliberate. So I look forward to expounding on that a little later. Thank you.
Thurman DeMills, Esquire.
Thank you. My impression initially was that in our early church history, there was involvement by the church as an institution. But as time went on, the involvement in activism was more of an individual endeavor rather than a institutional endeavor. And that the institution seemed to shy away from issues of race, and where it needed to be, and where it was taken up by individuals who had the courage, as my judge just mentioned, to go forward, notwithstanding what their institution was doing. And that also seems to be, to some extent, although we've had a number of great developments in the last few years as far as race is concerned, that still to some degree seems to be some of the things that we're dealing with now, that we're looking to individuals more so than necessarily the institution. And to follow up a little bit on what the person had to say, I know there are thousands of individuals out there who have made great contributions, whose names have not been mentioned and whose names would probably never be mentioned because they didn't do it for acclamation. They did it because there was a need. And if we were to go down a list of names, I would certainly name a number of people at Andrews who were responsible at a time when there were only a very few of us at Andrews, and there were things that had to be addressed. There was the formation of the BSCF. There was what was the only Black institution for a long time at Andrews was the Black History Week Committee. And that was extremely controversial at the time when it started. But Andrews the appearance of Andrews is quite different than it was when I was there. And I look forward to our continuing conversation on these issues.
Thank you. Leah.
I would add, when I was listening to Dr. Rock, my mind went back to my Oakwood days and the mission, right? To enter to learn and then depart to serve. And so I believe we all have been given our marching orders. What also stood out, though, is the fact that there's no movement, right? Like we have the orders, but we're not moving. We're not doing the work in which God has called us to do. And so I think that there's a void that is within the church space. Yes, there are individuals in which we all could probably call out, but when we're looking at it from an organizational standpoint, I think that we're lacking. And I am very, very interested in continuing this conversation on what it is that I and the other distinguished guests here feel that we can do to move the missions forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Ernest Flowers.
Actually, it's inspiring for me. I love those Black history lessons, especially the Seventh-day Adventist history lessons. And it's just encouraging for me. And I think it's a great gem that we can use, great ammunition that we can use when we're talking to some individuals in our church who may not be on that road, to show them, hey, we've been doing this for many years, for 100 years. This is part of our history. And it's also great to inspire our young people as well. So I'm just inspired by it. And I look forward to sharing more things that we can do to continue this history into the future.
Thank you so much. Dr. Thomas.
Yes, so I appreciated Dr. Rock as well. I enjoy history. I think we have a context to connect the dots as we look at the past, understand the present, and look forward to the future. I think, though, that there is a particular context that we may be missing or may not be missing. I'm not sure, certainly. So when Europeans came to Africa, they came with the Bible and the gun, right? And slave ships to extricate us from the motherland and bring us to a place of servitude. So we need to understand Adventists in terms of, in the context of a white religion that was created by white folks for white folks, right? And that narrative continues today. Unlike AME, even the African Baptist churches started as early as the 1600s here in this country. It was a Black church, albeit Baptist. And so in this particular context, it is a white church. It has been a white church. It has a white theology. And so then the notion of Black people raising their head to say something against the establishment was taboo. It was taboo in the case among Black folks and certainly white folks. And Black folks do a whole lot of policing right now to make sure that those who would interrupt the status quo would be pushed out, pushed aside, unemployed, blackballed, etc. So I think that we need to see history in this particular context. Dr. Wright rightly said that we need to start understanding the Bible from a liberation, a Black liberation perspective. But reality is the Bible itself is Black, but the Bible told us that it wasn't. And so when we read the Bible, we need to think in terms of Black folks in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, being the rule and not the exception, right? So the authors of the Bible who, Moses talking about come out of Egypt, that's Black theology. It exists today. And there are other voices who we have been unwilling to hear, who have promulgated this. And the notion of mission minus social activism is a bad idea every day of the week. We got to do better, even today.
It's interesting, Dr. Thomas, that you shared that, because the first thing that I think about is James Cone, in terms of the father of Black liberation theology. You have Aubrey Hendricks and some others that have really taken the time to speak truth to power. And one of the things that I got from Dr. Rock's presentation, as I lead into the next question for the panel, is that the church history, when you look at Ellen White, when you look at Joseph Bates, when you look at James White, when you look at our pioneers, they were always for inclusion. They were ahead of their times. They were always a part of the solution. And they spoke very clearly about race relations, spoke very clearly about slavery, spoke very clearly about reparation. But somehow, some way, the church started following the world during Reconstruction. And instead of the church being in the forefront, they followed the world as it relates to Reconstruction. They followed the world as it relates to segregation. As you look at our conferences today, they followed the world as in the civil rights movement, where they did not participate, but yet they found the benefit. As our attorney will so notice, that the Civil Rights Act is what gives us our religious accommodation letters today. It was on the back of Black folk marching and those that supported civil rights that all Adventists in this country are able to get a Sabbath accommodation letter, even though they failed to speak up and speak out. We find the church is always following the world instead of being a leader when it comes to women and the women's rights movement, the women's suffrage. The church always seems to be the tail. And we see the church once again the tail when it comes to Black Lives Matter. Instead of affirming and saying, love thy neighbor than ourselves, our churches are telling us to stay away and not be distracted, because the gospel is the cure-all for anything and everything that is taking place in today's society. And with that backdrop of the church really following the world, the question becomes, what are the most salient civil rights, social justice issues facing the Black Adventist church community today? Is it LGBTQ and inclusion? Is it gender equity, history of patriarchy and misogyny within and outside of the church? Is it generational poverty, economic mobility, or financial literacy? Or is it D, school system failure, school to prison pipeline, or mass incarceration? Let me repeat it again. What are the most salient civil rights / social justice issues facing the Black Adventist church community today? Is it A, LGBTQ plus inclusion? Is it B, gender equality, history of patriarchy and misogyny within and outside of the church? Is it C, generational poverty, economic mobility, or financial literacy? Or is it D, school system failure, school to prison pipeline? For example, the mass incarceration problem that we have today. We're going to let you marinate on that a little bit as you guys come up with your answers. And I'll just do a shameless plug, but the Conscience and Justice Council is hosting its convention September 22 to 25th in Glendale, California. For more information, go to www.cjcouncil.org. I repeat, www.cjcouncil.org. The content will be rich, and you can register in person or virtually at the website. Now that we've given our panelists some time to think, we will go ahead and start with Thurman DeMills.
Oh, you would do that, wouldn't you?
That's
You know, actually, you could have said all of the above, because in many ways they're all interrelated. But one other issue that probably, you're saying that this is a church issue or just a Black church issue, but I think one of the major concerns is that
Black
we are
Adventist Church.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Black Adventist Church.
Okay, I think we're having dwindling membership is contributing to all of that. And I don't know how you can address all of those if you don't have members who are able to address them. So I don't put a hierarchy of those issues as to put one above any of the others. Maybe my colleagues may disagree.
Thank you for that. Judge Boyd.
Thank you. I don't disagree with what Attorney Mills said. The issue is that I believe we need to establish an agenda, prioritize that agenda, and then move forward. And it's not only about movement; it's about social justice. It has to be a social justice movement. And when we speak of social justice, we are really concerned with what is right and what is wrong, as well as fairness and equity. In the criminal law, criminal justice is basically a subset of social justice that applies to the criminal justice process. And when we take that process and apply principles of right and wrong and examine those, and we see that those principles have been violated, then that's when we need to set an agenda and take a firm stand and make a movement toward correcting those ills that we see in our criminal justice system. Now, you gave us at least 4 topics to explore. I don't think they are mutually exclusive. I think that in some sense they are overlapping. And you didn't even mention drugs and the impact of drugs in our society and how prevalent that is and the deleterious effect that the drugs have on our society. But maybe we need to establish a category E. You gave us, we're down to D, but I say we need to add E to that discussion.
Please elaborate some more why you feel E.
Pardon?
Please share why we feel we need to add E to the discussion.
Oh, absolutely. In my particular profession, drugs have a tremendous impact and effect on our criminal justice system. Many of the individuals who appear before me, unfortunately, I would say at least 80% test positive for some type of illegal drug. Now, that takes into account the fact that marijuana is now legal in the state of Illinois. I'm saying that 80% are testing positive for illegal drugs. And most of the the participants of those crimes are individuals who are either drug selling or drug using. And that appears to be a large motivation for their level of recidivism or repeat offending due to the drug use or the drug sales. So that's why I said that it may be important to consider drugs as an agenda on our social justice platform.
As you can see, the judge has spoken and history doesn't lie. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. Ernest Flowers.
Well, listening to the list, I would at first lean toward education because that's the foundation of everything here. But I'm going to say that the generational poverty, specifically living in 2022 and looking at our membership, the stress that many of our members are under, the financial stress with all of the wealth being generated at this point in time, the financial stress that they're under, that our young people who are graduating from school are under, plays a significant role in a lot of the hardship that's going on, a lot of the mental and physical instability that we have right now. Our church is wonderful with doing outreach, but what I tend to try to do more is inreach. When I work with our local government, I'm always thinking about how I can improve the quality of life of our membership. And so I would say the generational poverty and financial literacy, from my point of view, is a very, very high, very, very high on the list.
Thank you for that. Leah Chapman.
When I hear the question, you asked what is most salient. When you look at salience, you're talking about a level of importance, and they're all important. So I go along with Attorney DeMills and Judge Boyd in the sense that the lineup that was given, even the additional one looking at drugs, I could add to that, right? Mental health and trauma within the Black community and the co-occurring disorders that are transpiring that doesn't allow for us to even make sound decisions in sound areas of our lives. The reality is that it all goes back to a systemic design of racism that is adversely affecting Black people, thus affecting the Black church. And so when you say this list of importance, they, to me, are all important. I think that many of us have our expertise in certain areas and can lend to make better certain situations due to whatever our expertise is, but we should not put one over the other. We need to begin to attack them all at one time so that we can prevail and move forward as a people.
Thank you. Dr. Nasakari.
Thank you. I would agree with Sister Leah, what she just said, so that the overarching umbrella is structural racism. And structural racism impedes adequate health care, mental health, education, economics, housing, a legal system that works and is equitable, politics, and you name it, right? So structural racism is the problem. But under that, we have a number of problems that have to be addressed. For instance, President Biden just said that he would give student loan relief and $10,000 to $20,000. Well, and that's for everybody. Well, that's not enough for us, for Black people. And when you think about it, Black folks in this country, on average, the students who have student loan debt have nearly 90% more debt, right? So all things aren't equal, but it is the structure of racism that continues to determine the incarceration levels. It continues to determine who gets stopped, who gets arrested, who gets killed, who gets the police called on them because they're sitting or standing or walking or watering their neighbor's yard, etc. And so, and as Sister Leah said, we have to attack on a multiplicity of fronts. Let the journalists do what they do. Let the Sheila Jackson Lees, the politicians, do what they do. Let the preachers do what they're supposed to do. The educators, the lawyers, the judges, etc. So on, the healthcare professionals, the business persons, and so we all have a part to play. And we have to work based on where we are equipped to work, where we are passionate about working, and then move from there.
Thank you so much. Cam.
I've got a different take on this. I agree with everyone here that that all of those are important, in particular economics in the U.S. and for Black folk. We've been disenfranchised. If you don't have any money, you're not at the table. First of all, you're not counted. But I want to do something a little different. I'm the PR person, so let's take this in a different way. The Black church has always been involved in some way in social justice, Adventism to some degree here and there, but the Black church, that's why politicians come to your church or ask to come, because they know our influence. And they know if they get in front of a congregation that those are votes for them. So there's some power there. And I don't know if I want to necessarily take the Adventist road to social justice, but I do want to take what the Black church has done for social justice. Let me also say this. If there is ever a question that any of those things that you mentioned are important or unimportant or what's on the hierarchy, I'm going to say that, well, you need to remember something. And Dr. Thomas spoke about it a few minutes ago. One of the most, one of the best stories of social justice is the story of Jesus. He was born to a teenager, right? In some place that was undesirable. He lived his life in an interesting way, and his friend rolled over on him on a lie, had him arrested, right? Judge, he had him arrested. They put him in jail, or they took him in. He had a kind of a rackety court day. We don't really know the outcome of that. And they killed him within 24 to 48 hours of that. So if there's ever a question of our obligation as Christians and any of those things that we just named, think back to that story and that green light should come on. The story of Jesus is the most hood ever, and the most redemptive ever, and the most moving ever. And our Christian duty is to fulfill all of those. And if you can fulfill it in the church, wonderful. If there is no avenue to fulfill it in the church and you feel a need, go out there and do it. Whatever that is, if it's just passing out something, or if it's tutoring after school, if it's lending a hand, if it's helping a kid fill out a form to get into college, whatever that is that pushes things forward, or pushes even one person forward, I think is helpful to move something. I don't know necessarily if the church always has a platform, but I know that people have platforms. And once again, if there's ever a question that if one or the other is more important, open that Bible and pull out some of those stories. Now, the good thing about Jesus is he died, right? They killed him, but he was able to get up, right? He people saw him later on. George Floyd never got up. And so if you start thinking about those people who didn't get up, I think that some of those sectors that you mentioned, you'll find a catalyst, and maybe one day one will be more important, and maybe another day another will be important. But all of those are important. But if there's ever a question of importance, go back to the Bible.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And last but not least, David Person.
Well, we can tell that Cam is the daughter of a preacher, because she laid that down. That was some good biblical exegesis there, Cam. You know, I want to say that I think we've talked about the church and the church's role, but I think we need to be more specific. When we talk about a failure to address salient issues that relate to social justice and that point to systemic problems, we need to look at the leadership of the church, because the leadership of the church sets the tone. And the leadership, unfortunately, of our church has been wrestling. I'm just going to take one example off of the list that you gave us, Woody, has been wrestling with the issue of women's ordination for decades. Why is that? That is some of the most ridiculous, I'm trying to be careful here in my word usage. It's one of the most ridiculous things I can think of, that in 2022, this denomination, our denomination, is still in a quandary about whether or not women have biblical and divine authority to lead. It is absolutely outrageous. Other denominations have settled this. Why have we not? It's because of the leadership. And I would argue that if you want to go down the rest of the list, you know, we've got issues that are going to be coming up at some point, like how do we deal with our LGBTQ members and former members? You know, how do we deal with poverty that is generational? How do we deal with educational inequities? How do we deal with other gender inequities? Based on the current tone of the leadership, we're going to be in trouble if we don't get this worked out. So my my comment or my advice, my admonition would be, we as laity need to push the leadership in the right direction. And we need to stop the foolishness related to something that should be relatively simple, like women's ordination, so that we can be in a better position to tackle some of these tougher issues.
No, I appreciate that. And as we go full screen so we can see everyone equally, we do have another question that we've come up with. But one of the things that I want to talk about is give a plug is the Seventh-day Adventist Christian education and what Shiloh is doing. One of the responses was generational poverty that Ernest Flowers brought up. And I really want to commend Pastor John Boston II and the Shiloh Church Board for identifying opportunities for Christian education for those who are in need in the community. Let me repeat that, in the community. In other words, how can we rescue children to have a right relationship with God, but also to get quality Adventist education, which Shiloh was known for. Now Chicago Christian Academy. When I was at Oakwood, everybody could compete. There were stellar students. Shiloh has a rich educational history with Dr. Ivan Van Lang, Cynthia Palmer. I'm sure there's others that you know that I don't know. Dave Daly, other great teachers that have just taught and sponsored kids. Kids. Shout out to my friend Paula Baldwin Furtana, who lost her mother, buried her this week. But fine graduate of Shiloh Academy, the Grahams. David, Camille, Shelley, Lalith. Great folk that have graduated from the academy. And just people that have continued to give back, and then to have this opportunity to provide a scholarship that the church is doing using evangelistic funds to be a beacon of hope in the south side of Chicago to provide opportunity. And when you think about the way to grow the church, Dr. Carlton B. Bird, president of Southwest Region, but whose grandmother was an institution in her own right at Shiloh Church, said evangelism in terms of having people join the church, but also through Christian education as it relates to people coming to the school. And so I really want to commend Pastor Boston for his visionary leadership, a bold stance. It's kind of hard coming in, as you know, Dr. Thomas, as a pastor and doing some things in less than a month, 2 months, what have you, and making these changes. And, you just want to give a shout out to the church board, but also to this alumni, that is also, rallying and encouraging folk to come. And so, we know that the donations for the alumni are there, and we want to support the alumni and not cause any division. But we also want to support, for those who might be interested, those scholarships for these students who are not associated with the church, but are in the community. And that can be done through the Shiloh Church. So hats off to Dr. Boston for that. But I also want to give hats off to Antonia Lewis Reese, who's the alumni that will help grow this school and have future graduates. I want to give a shout out to Cynthia Curran, who's the school board chairperson. Shout out to Janine Nicholson with Home and School, and a shout out to Margaret Webb as education. And knowing that all of these entities are coming together under the dynamic leadership of their new principal, Catherine Pyle, to make a difference for education in the south side of Chicago, both inside and outside of the church. So knowing the value of Adventist education and knowing what takes place, what should we be doing today to prepare courageous civil rights leaders or students that we have in our school for tomorrow? What should we do today? What should we do today? What suggestions do you have today that we can do to prepare our students to be civil rights leaders of tomorrow? And Leah, you're an educator by heart. I know that you have a dynamic artist, two dynamic daughters, but I know the artist is about to graduate. And I just want to give you a first tackle at that, knowing that you're an educator of heart and a fantastic social worker.
Well, thank you so much, Woody. To answer that question, I would say when we're working along with our youth, we need to help them to really understand their identity. I'm not a graduate of Shiloh. I am one of Peterson Warren Academy. And I often say that attending an all-Black institution from first grade until 12th grade, it allowed for me to see me. We don't get a lot of that in our public educational sectors. We find that a lot of the educators now are white females. And with that, it helps to kind of confuse our identity. And so I think the reestablishment of being able to have before our children history, Black history, allowing for them to see themselves, be firmly rooted and grounded in their excellence, right? Not looking at ourselves as slaves, but individuals that were royalty, that were taken in slavery, and that one day we did rise above. They have to know who they are. Outside of that, they will find themselves wavering and pulled into various directions without a lot of insight. And in their old age, right, having struggles of figuring out where to move forward in their path. So, just to answer that briefly, and I could go further into that, I would just say that we need to get back to having Black educators. So I encourage our young people that are coming up to get into the educational space. We need you. Our children need you. Your children need you to be before them and encourage them in who they truly are, so that when they reach the real world, they will not be deterred from a strong of voice and of community.
Thank you so much for that, Leah. Dr. Nasakori.
Yes, thank you for coming to me, because I wanted to speak to this. I would say that a Black space is good. A Black space is important. A Black space is necessary. But just getting together to have the Black space is better than not. But I think we have to do more. So we have to be intentional. And you essentially said, create warriors, right? Create those who will be the next generation of civil rights leaders, essentially, right? And so where is the civil rights curriculum, right? I went to Linwood Adventist Academy, and it was predominantly Black. After my first year, I think after my first 2 years, we had a Black principal, but it was just a Black head and Black people, but there was no social activism, intentional curriculum to ensure that we would lead the way, right? And this kind of goes back to what Dr. Rock says. It hasn't been included for a reason. At Oakwood, there was one class we took. It's an HBCU, but only because it's all Black folks there. It was one class. There was one class, right? Negro in history, Black Negro in history, I think it was, or something like that. And Negro in America, I'm sorry. And that class was taught. There may have been a Black literature class, but I don't think that came until a little later. So I said that to say that we have to be intentional about putting it together, a curriculum, and then modeling it, right? So having them involved in campaigns for civil rights, having them involved in campaigns for women's rights and equality of the LGBTQ community, having them involved in pay wage rights and so forth and so on. So we can't just be Black together. That's not enough. We got to be Black together and prepare the young people to do what T.R.M. Howard did. What Dr. Rock didn't mention was that when he was there in Mississippi, he trained Fannie Lou Hamer. He trained Medgar Evers, and then he went to Chicago and trained Jesse Jackson and others, right? So we have to have an intentional curriculum, an intentional mentorship program, so the next generation gets the message and sees us doing it.
Thank you for that. Ernest.
Ernest is muted.
You're muted, Ernest.
I apologize. I think we have all the tools necessary to really support our young people. And I would say I was the Bronx Manhattan Youth Federation president for about 2 terms. That's about 8 years. I believe in our youth federations. I believe in our Pathfinder groups, in our adventurer groups, our AY societies. We need to make sure that these organizations that we have within the church are robust and have great leadership, and make sure our young people are part of all of them and achieve the highest level or highest rank or highest activity in all of these. And once we have them involved in these things, we also need to use these organizations and and our young people that are in these areas, and we need to have them volunteer with our local civic associations. We need to have them intern with our local elected officials. We need to make sure that when they are of a certain age, that they understand the law of the land, and they understand who our congressman is and who our senator is. I think this is what we need to do with our young people. It will pay off. It's paying off even as we speak, because in the times in which we live, as we see what's happening in DC, we know how important that is, but we also understand that politics is local, and the strife and the barriers and the obstacles that we deal with oftentimes are local. And so we need to make sure that our young people are intimately involved in these areas, so that when we are in need and when we need to build in our church, we have people in place. Our young people will be firmly in place to support us and help us grow. So that's what I do with our young people. I make sure that they intern with our elected officials, our congressman, our senator, our assembly person, our council people, our mayor's office. And I make sure that our organizations, whether it be Pathfinders or whatnot, are represented in the front. And people know that our church is not only a church of people that go to church on Saturday, but we care about everybody. And our young people feed on that, and they become not only better citizens, but better Christians because of that.
Thank you. Judge Boyd.
At the risk of being redundant, I was told as a child, if I can see it, I can be it. I am fortunately a judge today because I saw one in 1980, Judge R. Eugene Pincham, rest in peace. And it was Judge Pincham who told me that I could be all that I want to be, and you can especially be what you see. So I think we need to provide an atmosphere to help the mindset of our children. And what we have, yes, it's the educational issues. Yes, it's financial issues. We have some disparity and racial conflict issues, but more importantly, I think it's mindset. Carl Boyd didn't grow up in a very fortunate family, but I was in an atmosphere that helped to shape my mindset. I believe Shiloh was a great foundation for me. I was involved with a lot of great families. I heard someone mention the Grahams. You have to think about the Burns, the Johnsons, the Van Langs. I mean, the history goes on and on at Shiloh Academy. But what happened is I got influenced and I got inspired. I got socialized appropriately. And that's a big issue, appropriate socialization. So I got the privilege of being socialized around in a great institution, around some great families and great leadership. So it was the modeling that was set before me. There was, we had some extremely strong male leaders in our school. You had a Mr. Biggs. You had 6, Mr. Williams. These were men among men in my book. And so I believe what we need to do is set a standard and ask our children to live up and rise up to this standard so that we can prepare the next generation of leaders. And that's the mindset and the mind frame we all need to be in, is to help to prepare tomorrow leaders today. So thank you.
Thank you, Judge Boyd. Let's see. Let's get Cam Boyd in this discussion. Hopefully she was able to get some water after that hooping she got finished doing.
Be quiet, Woody. Here's one of the things that was just mentioned. What we had role models at Shiloh. I went to Shiloh from 1st to 8th grade. Now we were a unique world because the same people we went to school with, we went to church with. So we literally saw these same people every day, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 if you had to go to Pathfinders, and you saw them throughout your entire educational career if you were there, and then went on to Oakwood. That is very unique and a very unique way to be socialized, and that breeds a number of positive things. So in terms of development, one of them is accountability. And we knew what we needed to do. You didn't want to disappoint teachers. You looked forward to going to that next grade. I can shout out some of my favorites, the Gates sisters in 1st and 6th grade, and then Carlita Richardson in 8th grade, and Kathy Howard in 5th grade. That's just 4 people, and I keep in contact with 2 of them as an adult. So that type of relationship is unique, and it can be fostered still. I think we were in a different time. There's no social media. There were so many other things that we have now that we don't have that lend it to positive communication and reinforcement. But if you're talking about developing a civil rights leader or how we can encourage kids to stay active, we have it right now. I don't know if we're doing a bad job. HBCUs are at an all-time high in terms of admission. So encourage your student or students or the kids in the church to go to an HBCU. And Oakwood definitely is a leader in that, or is a option. I went to Oakwood. I also went to Florida A&M. But I've also worked at Clark Atlanta University. So those options help reinforce the activism. You get to see some people that look like you, but you also get some of the other components that you need to just be a good citizen and how to develop. So I don't know if we're not developing activists or future leaders. As a matter of fact, with the vice president in particular, Howard University has received, along with a number of other people, a number of students based on their notoriety. So we have it. It's happening. We have to find a space in the church, perhaps, to move that forward, or to align it if it's not as prevalent, but it's there. But Shiloh in particular, and unique situations like Shiloh, like I said, they're not a bunch of places where you see the same people for 6 days and go to church with them, and then usually you can spend your whole academic career with them. And so that I think is pretty cool, but we're gonna have to step out of the box now, because I don't know if that happens as much. But that's just one. And then strong Black teachers and strong teachers, period. My mother is a retired teacher. Teaching is just a hard job. We have to encourage students to stay in or to go into education. It's the way we touch the future. And I taught adjunct for 8 years at Georgia State, and for a minute, at least when I first started teaching at Georgia State, I was the first Black teacher they'd had in their academic career. There were a number of students who hadn't seen anyone like me on the college level. So there's work to be done, but definitely seeing a person that looks like you can relate. And there's usually some comfort with that. And that may make the academic experience easier at times, or because you have someone to relate to.
Even in the 21st century, we're still making first. Once again, even in the 21st century, we're still making first. Thank God for Kamala Boyd and being a teacher, a hooper, and a caller of justice and righteousness in the 21st century. Appreciate that, Cammy Cam. All right. Let me see. Before I start counting, I got to remember who hasn't spoken. Thurman DeMills, Esquire.
Okay, I'm sorry, I had to hit that mute button, unmute. Yeah, I felt a little bit of nostalgia as I heard some of the common experiences that we shared at Shiloh. I was inspired by some of the very names mentioned, Van Lang, and of course you all know Mr. Willis Cosby, and each of them were very much concerned with excellence. They would not let us use bad grammar. They would not let us uh, express things in a way that wasn't appropriate for a professional. They began the seeds of professionalism in us and in leadership. When I was there, Elder Van Lang would listen to ideas we would have. I had an idea for a yearbook, and as a result of that, and his encouragement and the encouragement of other leaders in the school, we had the first student produced yearbook in 1970. And that's the kind of leadership that was that inspired a lot of other things, gave us the confidence to do other things, the confidence to pursue our own ideas. And I had to take that part and address Shiloh because I experienced it as my fellow Shilohites did. But one additional thing I wanted to address in terms of the specific question you asked is what we need to do in our respective professions and with our respective skills is to write our own history and not necessarily rely on the history that's presented for us. And I think an excellent example of that this year was the Sabbath School presentation that was written by, I think it was actually Dr. Rock, Dr. Pollock, and Dr. Graham. They did it during the month of February, Black History Week, and we had a Black History, social justice oriented Sabbath school lesson for an entire month. And that gave us a different perspective. It gave us, as he said in this presentation today, as well as then, it gave us an interpretation of the Bible through the lens of our own Black experience and relating it to that rather than to the European experience. And I took a great deal from that. And I mean, it's been a number of years now. I'm still learning new things about our history and learning about individuals in our past that I'd never heard of. And I'm almost 70 years old. And so that's the kind of thing I think we need to help our young people. We need to tell them about the people who were close to them. But Shiloh, as we were saying, Arnold Bontemps, who was mentioned both by Dr. Rock and in this conversation, was a principal at Shiloh, somebody that we could talk to, and yet he was a major part in Black American history. And there are numbers of individuals like that. But if we rely on the European history writers to write that, we're going to get a paragraph on page who knows what, or a footnote even. So I think one of the ways we can address this, and in every profession we have, is to make note of the people in our professions who are of color and who have made great contributions and who may not have a big name, who may not be a Supreme Court justice, or who may not be an Obama. And not to say we shouldn't be proud of those individuals, but all of those individuals stand on the shoulders of people whose names we have never, ever heard. People who died for the right to vote, people who died for the right to have to be on a jury. And the irony of all of this is that to some extent we are a victim of our own progress, because in many ways we couldn't go, when we were in the 50s and 60s, we couldn't go to certain schools, and we fought for the right to do that. And having gained the right to do that in a number of institutions, we have somewhat abandoned our own institutions, the only places we could go to at the time. Now that we can go to other places, we're losing our touch with our own history in the process. And so I suppose the way to regain that is for us all to take responsibility for making known. When we have the media now more than ever in history, we have pods, we have websites, we have all sorts of ways in which we can communicate information and our history and encourage each other in ways we never could before. I mean, I could go on, but I probably shouldn't.
Well, the bailiff didn't come and stop you, Mr. Attorney. The judge didn't ask for the bailiff. So we appreciate you, Thurman, for the information that you shared. And although you can go on and on, we're not here to stop you, but to glean and to learn from someone who has received the benefit of a Shiloh education. So thanks for your contributions and what you have shared. Last but not least, David Person.
Woody, Thurman and Carl and Cam and myself, all Shilohites, had the benefit of a great education with great teachers. I think I remember all of my elementary school teachers. I probably remember all of my teachers there, and both of my principals there. So, that was great for the time that we were there. But we live in a different time now. We're in a different century now. And I think we have to really consider what needs to happen. How does the paradigm need to shift to address where young people are, where families are today, and where our society is? And I would suggest one thing that should happen in the church, and I think this appears to be where Pastor Boston is going. I'm not sure if I'm overreaching here or not, but the idea of what is evangelism needs to change, and it needs to shift from building churches to building schools and to building community centers. To having a stronger, for church members and church leaders to have a stronger connection, a more direct connection to the communities in which people live and work and worship. And churches are fine, but you're not cultivating young people by building churches. You build a school, you recruit young people to schools, you train them, you help those families, you intersect with those families. You are then cultivating not only those individuals and educating those individuals, but you're actually cultivating your future church. So that's what I would submit needs to happen.
It's interesting, David, that you said that. We've heard about threats to democracy, all this week. And we're talking about being a practical application of Christ in our communities by building schools, by building community centers, and letting those be a sanctuary to help people's immediate needs so that they can see Christ versus receiving a presentation of Christ. Once again, so they can see Christ versus a presentation to Christ. And I just wanted to share with you guys before we go to our last question. And considering the threats to democracy, I can't help but to think about the threat to humanity. We know that the law is based upon loving the Lord with all of our heart and with all of our soul. And then the second part of the law is loving thy neighbor as thyself. Our neighbor represents our brothers and sisters created in the image and likeness of God. When we fail to love thy neighbor as thyself, that is the threat to humanity and not a distraction. Oftentimes, when we speak of social justice issues, they keep saying, well, those are distractions, and that is keeping us away from our mission in terms of baptizing and saving souls for Christ. So as we leave this broadcast, I want you to address this question. What specific challenges do we face as Black Christians who are Adventists in taking action on these issues? Is it silence and not speaking out? Is it relevance, holding on to traditions and not making room for actions that are better suited for the times? Is it engagement, visibility, not showing up on social justice issues or in the community in general? Is it identity crisis, being forced to grapple with changes in laws and social norms that are inconsistent with traditional beliefs? Or is it culture, Christian indoctrination of passive compliance, Black traumatic response of submission for survival? That's interesting. Dr. Samuel London, in his book, Seventh-day Adventists and the Civil Rights Movement, talked a lot about the culture at that time. So let me go back again. Once again, this, and then provide your closing remarks with this as well. And then I'll be bringing on our alumni president, the distinguished Antonia Lewis Reese, to close this out, and also to talk about donations, because it's not, what good is it to have alumni weekend if we don't tell people where to give money? And although, David, I didn't go to Shiloh, I do want to donate and make my donation clear, because I do believe in quality. And let me say it very clearly, quality Seventh-day Adventist education. And I like what Pastor Boston is doing. And I do want to be, support that, along with Margaret Webb, who's a part of that process as well. I've already mentioned Cynthia Curran and Janine Nicholson, and of course the lovely principal Catherine Kyle as well. But once again, what are the specific challenges do we face? I want you to make sure you heard what I said. Black Christians, meaning followers of Christ, who are Seventh-day Adventists and taking action on. Is it silence? Is it relevance? Is it engagement / visibility? Is it identity crisis, or is it culture? I want you to take the time to think about that, and then we'll have you. And then with that thought, that will also be your closing remark. Once again, with that thought, that will also be your closing remark. So I don't want to play the Jeopardy music right now, because I know whoever I call on is going to say I'm picking on someone. And so you can be rest assured it won't be Cam. Her arm doesn't reach from Georgia to Michigan. But that's where I would normally go, because we have that type of relationship. But I see the fist going. I don't know if that's an act of violence that needs a federal investigation, Judge Boyd, because it did cross state lines virtually from Georgia to Michigan, but we'll leave that alone. But we'll start off with Ernest Flowers before I act a fool and get myself in trouble. And then from Ernest Flowers, we'll go to Kamala Boyd. And then from Kamala Boyd, we'll go to Judge Boyd, and then we'll come back. Ernest?
Thank you, Woody. I believe that that we should be involved in every aspect of society, intimately involved. And sometimes we may get pushed back from our membership, but just a few years ago, our borough president here in Queens was running for the district attorney of our borough. And I brought her to about 7 different churches, Seventh-day Adventist churches. And she won by less than 50 votes. And she always talks about how eternally grateful she is for our church. And so, certain individuals who may not have been happy about having an elected official running for another position come to our church during divine service, sometime later may or may not have come to me and asked for help because their son was in legal trouble. And who do we go to? We go back to our district attorney. So we need to be involved in every single aspect of our society. We need to be intimately involved, and we need to show our community that we are not just here to pass out literature or do a gathering or invite them to a prayer meeting, which I think is and I think we are here to evangelize first and foremost. So that's number one. That's the number one priority, to evangelize. But we also need to let them know that we care about every aspect of their lives, not only spiritually, which is the most important, but also financially, physically, politically. And when we have that well-rounded, written agenda and we implement it, then we will rise to a level unheard of, even by our predecessors whose shoulders we stand on.
Thank you, Ernest, and thank you for being a part of this broadcast, sharing your experiences and expertise. We appreciate you. Kamala, did I say Kamala? Yeah, I said Kamala. Mm-hmm. Come on, Kamala, with the fist pump. That's how I'm gonna look at it.
All right, stop. Here's the thing. I think most of those are all relevant. They're relevant issues in society. So anytime there's a relevant issue in society, it's going to be an issue for the church as a denomination, or for any denomination, because it's a society problem. But what I will say, I think women's rights, so equity, inclusion. So there was a category about being seen and being responsive. We've had a couple of things happen with women's rights. The Roe versus Wade was overturned, and I know people are going to feel different kind of ways about that, but there's some women's health issues, women's health things that are kind of connected to that. So it's not just about, or wasn't just about abortion. So when you have a society that can strip a woman's right to choose, you will then have a society that will probably pay women less. So that's pay equity. And I think it's what 77 we men make. And I'm sure if we took the Black numbers, it's going to be a little bit differently. Here in Atlanta, Black women do pretty well financially in terms of their career, but there's still some things happening. And so David said something a lot earlier about women being ordained in a world where our rights are stripped, or in a country where that's stripped, and in a country where pay equity has always been an issue. We could probably talk all day long about the church and ordination. And but there are things that are just societal that undergird that. So I think one of the challenges is not only do we stay relevant and stay with the mission and all that, but how do we support LGBTQ rights, gender rights, equity, all of those things? Because see, our companies and the way that the economy rolls in this country, that's what they're looking at now. They realize the importance of DE&I. So our church is going to have to begin to look at that. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've talked about it and all of that, but it's packaged now. Corporate America uses that. They measure things by that. So I think our church should, one of the many things, should put at the forefront is equity. And in a world where women are getting paid less, our rights are not there, I see plenty of room for them never to ordain or to continue to fuss about ordination, David. I could go on and on about this, but I'm going to let the rest of the panel go for it. But there you go, Woody. There you go. No fist this time, but there is an attorney present, and he can't represent.
Cameron, nothing but love and respect. Thank you once again for sharing your expertise, your wit, your wisdom, and being very practical. And how you're not articulating, but presenting tools that we can follow. Once again, thank you for your insights. Now let's hear from Leah Chapman. Then from Leah Chapman, we'll go to Dr. Thomas. And then from Dr. Thomas, we'll go to Thurman DeMills. And then we'll conclude with David Persons. Thank you. Leah?
All right. So I would say that one of the largest challenges that I feel that the church needs to address is the silence. The silence to me becomes synonymous to being able to turn a blind eye to all of the other social ills that's being named. And we often see this not just looking at exterior situations, things that are not happening within the church, but also within the church, There's so much that we act as though is not happening. We talk a lot about people behind their backs in meetings, but we don't want to address, the real need of the issues that are presenting itself. And so this silence is doing great harm internally and externally. And as Christians, as Black Christians, that snuffs out our light. We become irrelevant. We become a harm to society. And so I would say the silence is something that definitely needs to be addressed. And then all of the other things will be at least, taken care of, or someone is attending to it at some point in time. And when that's done, I think that we can then move to a healthier space within the church, and we would possibly see our churches full again, because people are shying away from the church because there is a lack of individuals that are confronting situations that they know are bringing harm and pain to the constituency within our conferences. So I would say my last closing statement: be willing to lose something. If you're going to get out here in this fight of social justice, and that's internally and externally, you cannot do this from a space of comfort. So you must be willing to lose friends, relationships, whatever it may be, but be willing to lose as Christ did.
Leah, thank you for that. I mean, very succinct, but powerful. Be willing to lose, be willing to lose. And Paul says, we got to stop looking out for our own interests, but look in the interest of others. And so many times, it's right there in the Bible. People need to read Philippians, but Paul waxed eloquently about people looking out for their self-interest more than the best interests of others. So thank you for reminding us of that, Leah. Thank you for being the stalwart that you are, and for one who does not shy away from the issues, not afraid to lose relationships, and will always speak truth to power, regardless of who's in office. So thank God for you. Judge Boyd, I missed you. Let's bring you back so that we can hear your comments right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Woody. First of all, to all the other panelists, great, just great presentations. Thank you all. I'm listening, I'm learning, and I'm looking. But as Black Christians, we have to become more relevant. And I think the apathy, time out for the apathy and the passivity. We've been inactive long enough. It's time for us to be not reactive, but proactive. We need to get into the fight. We need to be first to strike. And if that's in the educational space, we need to be first. If it's in the criminal justice space, we need to be first. If it's in the political realm, or even in the financial realm, we need to be first. We need to step up and stand out. The problem is we've become too complacent and we've become relaxed. Earlier, I believe it was Sister Boyd, no relation, but Sister Boyd may have told us that we need to reteach the story of Jesus. Jesus taught us to be courageous. He taught us to be bold and daring and have some audacity. You know, the audacity of a young man like myself to come from an underprivileged community and to arrive at an all-white institution and to excel. That takes courage, that takes audacity. And that's what I gleaned from Shiloh, and that's what I received. And earlier, I forgot, I don't know if it was David who spoke about we have to become relevant today. What we did in the 1970s and 80s is no longer effective. So we need to create a new effective strategy to help our young people today to be prepared to lead us into tomorrow. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this great conversation. And I just absolutely love Shiloh. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, court is in session and Judge Boyd is in charge. Thank you so much for sharing, Judge, taking time out of your schedule and giving back to a school that has given so much to you. So thank you for demonstrating that in spirit and in truth. All right. Thurman DeMills, you're up.
You always have me following the judge. It should be.
Well, you know, I figured judge, attorney, judges, making sure I don't forget anybody because we have such wonderful guests on this panel.
I certainly want to say that I feel I've been privileged in being a part of this panel, and I get some excellent ideas and some great things for thought. And all that we've mentioned and all that has just been mentioned, I applaud and I agree with. But I also think I'd be remiss if I don't mention that we're in an unusual time. And we, as Adventists, who have always promoted the truth and have not been afraid to promote the truth, even at our own personal peril, whether it's upholding the Sabbath against a job environment that didn't understand why we needed to be off on Sabbath, or why we would refuse to partake of alcohol in social groups, or whether we would have a certain diet that's unique and peculiar to all other individuals with whom we would have to come in contact. We are not afraid, or we have not, as our culture, has not been afraid to stand up for the truth. And that cannot be any more important than it is today. Today it's more important than any other time in our history, because we are at a point where the truth is possibly becoming obsolete. The truth needs to be stood up for. And I think we are uniquely qualified and courageous enough to do that. I think you all know what I'm talking about when people call truth alternative facts. When we have a political environment that's affecting every aspect of our living, where people and our leaders are unwilling to acknowledge clear and present truth. So I again want to thank you all for allowing me to participate in this panel. And I just don't want us to lose sight of the very environment that we're dealing with, no matter what approach we take. We still have to deal with what's going on right now. Again, my great appreciation to Antonia Lewis, who has done an outstanding job in putting together this program and bringing together this august panel. And I pray that God continues to bless Shiloh and to, as a result, hopefully in part for our discussions, to give new things for our leaders within our school and within our church to think about and to consider. And I have been inspired by this conversation. I've been inspired by Dr. Rock's presentation and by the pastor this morning, Pastor Madrid. This has been a truly inspirational day, and I hope all of the others have been so similarly inspired. May God bless you all.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, the legendary Thurman DeMills, never afraid to raise his voice and share a thoughtful and meaningful perspective. We appreciate you being with us today. Dr. Carey, sorry, trying to get my hooked on phonics done correctly. Thomas, please come on and share your perspective, and look forward to hearing from you.
All righty. So I would say, in terms of specific challenges facing us, I would say relevance and culture. And some would argue that there is in Adventism a culture of irrelevance, right? And perhaps that's why many, not only millennials have left and are leaving, but also multi-generations, right? And so I think David mentioned that we are doing things that we've always done and expecting a different result. And so we're still doing evangelism and education the way we did it in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And as David said, there is a new paradigm. One thing that the pandemic taught us is that we cannot have experience a pandemic and go back to normal. We've got to adjust. And I said, beginning in March 2020, that we have to pivot or we will perish. What we do know is since 1965, 10 million young people have left the church. So the salient question is why? And I believe it has to do with relevance, right? And so, for instance, we keep trying to put the new wine in the old wineskins. So there are monies that the church hasn't benefited from. Shiloh hasn't benefited, and all of the other the academies across the nation, but they're closing, they're dwindling, they're diminishing, right? They're retracting, right? But there are federal dollars, county, city, private funders. The interesting thing is in 2021, philanthropic giving actually went up, right? Which is amazing, right? We're in a pandemic, but there are people who like Ralph Waldo Emerson said, if we build a better mousetrap, they will make a beaten path unto our door. And so we have to develop a niche. And just because we are Black and Seventh-day Adventists don't mean that's a better mousetrap. That just means we've got a chair and a desk and a building, right? And a teacher. So we need the dollars so that we can have innovation. We need the dollars so we can have the programs. We need the dollars so that we can do things in ways that we've not done before, so that we can, experience great outcomes that we've never experienced before. And so it's called market differentiation, right? So there's competition. And the competition determines that folks will go to X, Y, and Z school instead of Shiloh or LA Academy or wherever the other academy, GAAA or whatever, because they're not competing. So then why is that? Because the charter schools have enormous funding, right? Private schools have enormous funding. And sometimes we say, well, if we get federal dollars, well, then they're going to control us. Well, it doesn't happen at the higher education level. Oakwood gets money, La Sierra gets money, Southern gets money. They get federal dollars. And so we have to find a way to be, and there are private folks who would give money as well, but we have to get out of the box and access funds, innovation, and technology in ways that we have, and we can't be afraid to do that. Now, having said that, I want to tip my hat to Pastor Boston and the Lake Region Conference officials for revisioning evangelism and seeing, like David said, that evangelism is education. So if we're going to, put a tent up or do a meeting and spend, $80,000. Well, let's give $80,000 to the school, because that is where the inner city evangelism is taking place. So I'll leave it there. Thanks so much for conducting this panel. Appreciate Sister Antonia Lewis for the work that she's done. Woody, for your leadership here in the great panel. And hats off. And we'll continue to be praying for Shiloh. And we're going to send a couple of dollars too.
All right. Y'all heard it for yourself. Dr. Nasa Carey Thomas. Appreciate that. Last but not least, a son of Shiloh in his own right, just like some of the alumnus that we have here today. Last but not least, but once again, a true person that only stands up, but writes, articulates, and protests in action. Let's give it up one more time for David Person.
Woody, thanks so much for your leadership in creating panels like this that will hopefully provoke some thought and dialogue in our churches and our communities. I also want to thank Sister Lewis and also my dear longtime friend, Sister Fouché, who's good to see when she introduced Dr. Rock. I am a proud Shilohite. Was there from 1968 to 1991, 13 years of Shiloh education. And so whatever I have done, whatever I've accomplished, would not have happened without the influence of not only my Shiloh teachers and principals, but also my Shiloh classmates and schoolmates. And that's why it was really good to see Carl today. I hadn't seen Carl in quite a few decades, even though he's still looking the same. And we used to hang out together. You and Peter and I used to hang out in the summer and swim at that pool off of 87th Street. I can't remember the name of it, but it was good to see Carl and everyone this afternoon and this evening. I think the key word is relevance, and we can probably fold culture into that as well as my good Oakwoodite, fellow Oakwoodite, and very good friend Nasa Carey just said. But I would go with relevance. And I think part of being relevant is cultivating in our community a spiritual maturity about how we interface with society and with the larger world. For example, if we're going to truly, as I think Cam was saying, follow the example of Jesus, then we're going to have to fully embrace the concept of social equity. And that should not be selective. It should be for all people, any disenfranchised people. And that does not mean by embracing social equity, equality for all people, that we endorse everything everybody does any more than it means that now. I go to shop at Walmart. Does that mean that I endorse everything that Walmart sells? No. I go and I interface with other businesses and other people. Does that mean that because I've got a cousin or an uncle or an aunt who goes to church or has certain religious values or social values that I endorse everything they're doing? No, but we're still family. And I would argue that we've got to integrate this way of thinking and elevate our way of thinking as it relates to society. Develop a spiritual maturity that says, I can support equity for everybody, even if I don't agree with or understand some of their lifestyle practices or some of their beliefs, religious or otherwise. And that will then help us to be able to shift the paradigm from irrelevance, as Nas just said, to relevance. And that is going to be key if we're going to have any kind of impact in this world that we live in my opinion. Again, thank you for this opportunity. I'm a proud Shilohite, and God bless Shiloh or Chicago. Well, I guess I should say Chicago SDA Academy as it moves forward.
Amen. Amen. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for this distinguished panel. Let's give it up for this distinguished panel. David Person, Leah Mills Chapman, Judge Carl Boyd, Dr. Nasa Carey Thomas. Ernest Flowers, Thurman DeMills, and last but not least, the lovely Kamala Boyd. I want to take this opportunity to bring our alumni president, Antonia Lewis Reese. There she is. Look at her. Isn't she lovely? All right. Happy to have you. And thank you so much for everything you have done behind the scenes to ensure a fantastic alumni weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, can we give her a round of applause so she can see her flowers right now while she's alive? Let's give her a round of applause. Come on, let's put her back on in full screen so you can take that. There we go. We want to see her. And we'll let our guests leave. And Antonia, let's just have a brief conversation as we let our guests leave and thank them once again for being a part of this august panel. We're happy to have them again. Antonia, you've done such a great job being the president. And just tell us, this is a labor of love, but just tell us what makes Shiloh so special to you.
Oh, wow. Can you all hear me okay? Because I'm in my car. I just dropped the pastor off. Great. What makes Shiloh special to me are a couple of things. One, and during my time there, I was surrounded by Black folks who were excellent at what they did. They were educated. They were cultured. They were interested in my well-being. And the other piece of it is that, you get that reinforcement from church and school and all that. I don't think we fully appreciate it as young people when we're, we just kind of like, oh, we're back at school with these same people again, right? But there is a reinforcement that happens there. You're getting it at church, you're getting it at school, you're getting it at home. And if you're not getting it at home, you're getting it in 2 or 3 of those places, or at least one of those places. That's the beauty of it. And then, there's that opportunity there to be free in your religious expression, and not even just religious expression, because I kind of want to get away from the dogmatic reference to organized religion. This is about me and God and my freedom to be able to express my love of Jesus with my friends and share it with them. And we can be free in that together. That is so liberating. And if you're in a public school, and I've actually, the only time I went to public school, interestingly, was in grad school. I went to Adventist school my entire life because I was a PK and all of that. And I think there's pros and cons, right? But I think I've greatly benefited from that circle, that triangle, rather. Church, home, school. That's what they put on there all the time.
And I just want to thank you because I know how hard you work. And I just want to make sure you know that you're validated, you're appreciated, because this job doesn't pay you any money. It's a volunteer headache, and you've done a job. I just want people, if you can just show on the screen how to give back, how to give money to Shiloh. Dr. Thomas and I both want to contribute. And it talks about, do we have a slide or the slide? If it is, there we go. Help me out because I don't have my glasses on. I'm sorry. I'm cheating, but you can do a Cash App with the cash sign SC3A. You can donate on Cash App with the $ SC3A, or you can go to ShilohChicagoAlumni.org, ShilohChicagoAlumni.org, and click donate. Once again, ShilohChicagoAlumni.org, click donate, or Cash App $ SC3A. Antonia, let me just ask you a question. If people want to mark to give to what the church is doing in terms of giving scholarships to students in the community, how do they do that when they give? Can you share that?
So if you put in your memo when you give, then we can make sure that we earmark that directly for that cause. Another way, you can also give directly to the school. The school has its own Cash App for tuition relief and things like that. And that's Chicago, that's $ Chicago SDA Shiloh. All one. And so you can give directly to them. You can give it to us. It would kind of be like a trust if you give it to us. But any way is fine. Whatever you're most familiar with, whatever you're most comfortable with. We just want to make sure that it gets to where it needs to get to.
Absolutely. I think
even there's a way Shiloh on their website, when you give through their website, if you put in your note, they'll earmark it for the same purpose. Sorry, I think I interrupted you there.
No, you're doing what you're supposed to do. You're the president. You're the president. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, for those who are willing to give, you saw the information. And if you mark the community grant or the evangelism grant that the church is doing, they will make sure, I repeat, they will make sure that the money gets there. They will make sure that the money gets there. So I really want to do that. One question. Do you know what the cost is, Antonia, for the cost of tuition for one student at Shiloh, if somebody wanted to donate?
If it has not changed, monthly for non-Adventist students, it's $350, and I believe for Adventist students, it's $325. Yeah.
We'll always go with the $350 amount, and I know you're right.
That's right.
Because I have somebody telling me, I know you're right. So 350 times 10 would be $3,500. $3,500. $3,500 for tuition for one student to attend Shiloh. $3,500. $3,500. So Anthony, I just want to thank you, want to acknowledge you and your leadership. And I know you're thick as thieves with my buddy Marilyn Fouché. And just want to acknowledge the partnership that you guys have done. And that's what it should be, Antonia. Yes. And you are very easy to work with, very caring, energetic, fun, and just a testimony to your outstanding parents, who I know and appreciate, but also just to who you are as a young lady and the difference that you're making. So God bless you as I turn this program back to you. And congratulations for a fine job to you and your team on what you accomplished today, on behalf of Black Seventh-day Adventist Christian Adventist education. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you, Woody, and all of our distinguished guests, Dr. Rock. We were honored by your presence today. I kind of want to go back to the idea about flipping evangelism on its ear. My mother and I talk about this all the time, and we're so excited to hear that this is the definition or the perspective that Shiloh is starting to adopt. Because when you're talking about measuring the saving of souls, Frederick Douglass said it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And so if we start with the children, we are instilling a sense of identity. We're increasing exposure to other cultures and ideas around the world. We're improving, by way of that, their career outcomes. We're improving their increased mobility economically, and we're increasing their ability to lead. So with that, I just want to leave that with you all. I thank you all for joining us this weekend. This has been such a blessing to me, and I hope it was a blessing to you. And at this time, I'd like to just bow my head and send us off into a relaxing Labor Day weekend. So, Lord, Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for bringing us together for yet another year, celebrating your school and all the folks who work together to hold it up. And we need more people to step up. The times are changing. Prophecies are being fulfilled every day. And we need to have ourselves in order and in formation in order to advance your kingdom. So at this time, I ask that you bless us as we all go our separate ways, keep us protected, uplift our school, and save us when you come. In your name I pray and thank you. Amen. You all have a great weekend. I'm going to head home. Thank you. We love you, and we'll see you next year.